Hi, everyone. Those who don't know me, my name is Melanie Walker, and I am the Executive Director for the Canadian International Council. Just delighted that you're here. We also have an online audience tonight, or this evening, or this afternoon, I suppose it still is. So a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us online. And a few housekeeping notes before we get started. For those of you that are joining online, if you do have questions, please type them into the chat, and we will get to them during the Q&A session. We are going to have our keynote, then we will have a facilitated conversation, and then we invite you as well to join us for some refreshments next door to continue the lovely conversation that we are going to get started on. So if you do see somebody come into the room, that actually is the man for whom this lecture series has been named. Someone who has spent a good portion of his life analyzing and assessing a certain characteristic that is uniquely Canadian. His name is William Macdonald. And his argument, and something that he studied and in cooperation with Trent University, which is our partner in this series, the question around a unique Canadian quality called mutual accommodation, not tolerance, which carries with it an element of superiority, not mutual accommodation, not straightforward compromise, which too often finds the least common denominator, but mutual accommodation, as I've come to understand it, and I am still a student of this and learning myself, is something harder and more demanding. It is the search for the largest common denominators, practical, patient, and above all, requiring that you understand the other side, or at least try to, as well as you understand yourself. But that understanding is only possible if all the voices are in the room. The Canadian International Council, through this lecture series, alongside other initiatives to promote national dialogue and civic education through our 19 branches, coast to coast, and our editorial offerings, Open Canada and the International Journal, advances that effort. For nearly 100 years, we're in our 98th year, our North Star has been to strengthen Canadian engagement in international affairs through independent and inclusive dialogue, thoughtful commentary, and education on the world around us and Canada's role in it. With this knowledge, we as Canadians are better equipped to engage globally in a meaningful way, and as citizens, we are better equipped to contribute to the democratic process. Informed citizens make good citizens. And the Macdonald Lecture Series, built in partnership with Trent University, and thanks to the generosity of a significant group of supporters, including the Macdonald family, showcases this uniquely Canadian trait, exploring and unpacking it, mutual accommodation. Most recently, we're doing so through the lens of the relationship that has tested it most in recent years, and that is our relationship with the United States. It is a particular honor to open our 2026 lecture series with Bill Macdonald, soon to be in the room, not quite here with us, but he will be joining us. And, of course, with our keynote today, noted research and analyst Michael Adams, whose work on Canadian and American values has been asking these questions for decades. Michael is our first lecturer of the year and will be introduced by our partner today, Julie Davis, Vice President, External Relations and Development at Trent University. So please, Julie, you're most welcome.
Great, thank you, Melanie. Good evening, everybody, and especially warm welcome to the Trent alumni in the room. I know there's a number of you here this evening. As Melanie noted, this lecture is part of a strong and growing partnership between Trent University and the Canadian International Council. And partnerships like this are very important for us. They extend the reach of the university beyond the campus and connect academic insight with public conversation in meaningful ways. We believe very strongly in interdisciplinary learning and view collaboration and partnerships as vital. And we're committed to bringing people together to engage with ideas, ask questions, and deepen understanding not just of the issues, but of each other. Our motto at Trent is "Now I know in part," and that fuels our passion to foster critical thinking, curiosity, and constructive engagement. Trent was the first university in Canada to establish a program in Canadian studies more than 50 years ago. And today, our faculty and students continue to make really important contributions to issues such as sovereignty, nationalism, multiculturalism, security, the Arctic, what it means to be Canadian, and more. And these topics are more important than ever, and so we're delighted to be here this evening, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Michael Adams. So Michael joins us as this year's Macdonald Fellow, which is an affiliated appointment that includes the Macdonald Lectures coming to Trent to speak with and mentor students, which happened yesterday. Michael is the founder and president of the Environics Institute, an organization dedicated to in-depth research on the social and political forces shaping Canada's future. He co-founded the Environics Research Group and is widely recognized as one of the country's leading commentators on social values and change. He's the author of several influential books, including Fire and Ice and Could It Happen Here?, both of which examine the evolving relationship between Canada and the United States and the broader forces shaping our society. In recognition of his contributions to public opinion research and his work helping Canadians better understand themselves, Michael was appointed to the Order of Canada in 2016. In tonight's lecture, depending on how it goes and whether you follow the notes or you just go with your heart, Michael will explore how Canadian and American values are evolving in a moment shaped by political change, economic pressure, renewed questions about sovereignty and identity. And at a time when many people are reflecting on what defines Canada and how we relate to others, this conversation offers a remarkable opportunity to step back and consider those questions more deeply. So please join me in welcoming Michael Adams.
So, Julie, thank you. That accent. I'm sorry, I'm a sociologist, like I have to. It's very charming. Thank you for that introduction. Melanie, thank you for being part of the group who bring me here today. CIC, the Trent University, and most particularly the Macdonald family, and Bill, who was not here yet, but we hope he will show up. There is a Macdonald here. My friend David.
He's waiting for Bill outside.
Oh, he's waiting for Bill. His son. Well, he's the eldest son. He's a dutiful son, and he's going to help his dad join us today. And this audience, which is filled with family, friends, old friends, well, some new friends too, and prominent Canadians. I'm not going to single you out. I wouldn't want to do that. You are Canadians. You are humble. But you know who you are. Some Order of Canada recipients and so on. So why am I here today? Our country is in danger. I was speaking to somebody who has a great interest in Ukraine, and I said, well, I do feel a bit embarrassed about saying my country is in danger when we know what's going on in Ukraine, we know what's going on in the Middle East, we know what's going on in Ethiopia and other parts of Africa and so on, but we are in danger. And I've been asked here as a pollster, has shown some interest in my country and some interest in comparing my country to other advanced countries in the world, other countries in the world, and in particular the United States. So I guess the thought was that I might have something to contribute. I am the third fellow. I guess I may be the fourth, because in the first year, it was Martin Wolf, who's a friend of Bill's. There's my friend Bill. And Chrystia Freeland, our former foreign minister, et cetera. where I gave the first lecture, and then the second was, I guess, last year, Andrew Coyne of the Globe and Mail. So I am the third or fourth fellow to be honored with this, to be asked to give a lecture in honor of Bill Macdonald. I will say a few words about Bill Macdonald before the evening is over. So November 8th, 2016, all you remember where you were? You would have been watching your television, I think, that evening, hoping that you were going to be going to bed about 11. Some of us are getting to an age where to stay up to 11 o'clock, but we were staying up till 11 and midnight, and then 1 o'clock, and then 2 o'clock, and we eventually fell asleep. When we got up the next morning, we said, holy mackerel. We might have used stronger language, but we said Hillary didn't win. They elected Trump. And I immediately, after reading the paper and I guess tuning on CNN just to make sure this was right, I went up in front of my PC and I banged out a book proposal. And I said, oh my God, the Canadians are going to be terrified that their neighbors have elected this guy, that it could happen here. So could it happen here? Could Trump's style of MAGA populism come north of the border? Well, in doing that, I then thought, okay, I'm going to draw upon the work I've been doing for the last 15 or 20 years, me and my colleagues, and on social values. And that first book on comparing Canada and the United States was called Fire and Ice, the United States, Canada, and the Myth of Converging Values. And that came out in 2003. And for a lot of people, that seemed pretty astounding because on the surface of it, we do look very much the same. We're kind of hedonistic, materialistic people. We don't like the weather when it rains or snows. We often head down to Arizona or Florida and so on. We have a lot in common. We drive cars, we live in suburbia and so on. But I wanted to look at the data from which the surveys we'd done in Canada and the United States in 92, 96, and 2000, and add it all up and say, what do I think, are we converging or diverging? And that book was building upon a book I had done in 1997, my first one, called Sex in the Snow. And that was not my autobiography, I can assure you. My old girlfriends from high school reminded me that I had been interesting in high school, but I was not that interesting. So they do keep you in place. So I wrote this book, Sex in the Snow, and it was about the evolution of social values in Canada. And I got a call from Bill Macdonald's assistant, who said, Mr. Adams, you've written this book. Mr. Macdonald would like you to come to lunch with him and discuss your book. So I checked out who Bill Macdonald was, and I learned that he had been a prominent leading lawyer, a rainmaker at McMillan Bench, one of our leading law firms, for many, many years. But believe it or not, I don't know what age Bill was at when he decided that he'd made enough money or he did enough legal stuff that he wanted to become and help his friends discuss ideas. This man is a Canadian, interested in ideas. And so he moved out of McBench and moved into his own office. And he got CEOs from, Bell Canada, Royal Bank, and all these others to come and have lunch with him and to discuss ideas. And then I realized he had honored me to come and discuss my ideas about what was happening in Canada, Sex in the Snow. I could say that Bill invited me, but I think actually Bill summoned me to come to his office and explain what it is I was talking about, this sex in the snow, this changing of social values. And then he proceeded to tell me what it was that I was trying to say. And we bonded terrifically. What a lunch it was. There was a glass or two of Chardonnay, which I very much appreciated. And we became friends, so that's what, late 1980s. And I would say Bill would summon me about every time I wrote a book or every time he got the inspiration to come with him. It would sometimes be in his office, it would sometimes be at Winston's or up at the Four Seasons and so on. And we just had developed a great relationship, and I could see this makes perfect sense to me, that now that Bill is, I guess you would say you are now maybe a senior citizen, Bill, you're certain? Yeah, 98, okay. So he's threatening to move from middle-aged into his senior years, and he still maintains an active life, certainly intellectually. And his family, to honor their dad, have created this lecture, the William A. Macdonald Lecture. Everybody who knows him calls him Bill. And with him today is his eldest son, David. David and I are friends. I'm friends with, Bill, David. And so I consider myself a pretty good friend of the family, and I'm certainly honored to be this lecturer today. So these books, where I'm studying Canada and who we are and how we've changed, they're based on a study of what we call values. Now, when you say values, like some people would criticize someone and say, well, he has no values. And then what they mean is they don't like their values or they disapprove of them. Well, we're social scientists. We're supposed to actually honor all of these values, whether we like them or not. And we're supposed to be objective in studying them and trying to figure out what they are. The values are the things in our head that motivate us in our various roles in life. Like, what should we be trying to do as parents, as consumers, as employees, as investors, as citizens, as spiritual beings? What is it that's motivating us to do what we do? 100 years ago, you wouldn't have had to study it because you would have assumed that people's values were their religious values, and everybody was religious. If they were a Christian, and most of us in Canada 100 years ago were Christian, there were others, but you would just basically say those are the values that people are living up to or trying to live up to in their various roles in society. But those values, those religious values, were questioned. And people, even 100 years ago, were starting to question things like patriarchy. They were questioning things like sexism, the natural superiority of men. They were questioning hierarchy, the natural order of a society in which there are people on top who are the elite, and then there are the others who are lower down the hierarchy. And based on gender and age and ethnicity and religion and cultural background and so on, people were placed in this hierarchy. So the value that if I had only one value to protect, and there are about 100 or more that we are tracking and have been tracking in Canada since 1983 and in the US since 1992, the one I would start with would be kind of the fundamental value that describes the structure of authority in the family. And that value is one in which there's kind of one famous phrase, a statement to which we ask random samples of Americans and Canadians and people around the world to agree or disagree, strongly or somewhat, the father of the family must be master in his own house. Now, I have been at lectures and seminars and so on where I mentioned this, and a sociologist from Chile came up to me and said, "What a stupid question. Who the hell else would be the master of the house other than the man in the house?" In other words, the value was so ubiquitous and so pervasive that it was invisible. We then did a survey, of course, in Canada a few years ago, and called a woman in Waterloo who said, "That is an extremely stupid and offensive question, and I'm not going to answer any more of your questions. By even asking the question, I was projecting the idea that such an idea that the man would be the leader of the family. And the woman was best actress in a supporting role, I guess, and the children didn't speak till spoken to. Certainly I can say that goes back 150 years in my family. So there are about 100 values that we track. Some are correlated, like patriarchy and sexism, again, the natural superiority of men over women, in spite of all the evidence to the contrary. But at any rate, that is a question that we put to people. And another would be violence as being normative or being efficacious or just being letting off steam and so on. So we, in studying this, concluded with Fire and Ice that there, in spite of, again, what seemed obvious to a lot of people, Canadians were actually diverging in a lot of these basic values from their American cousins and relatives and friends and so on. And so Father as Master, 92, 96, 2000, every year the difference between the two became larger, with Canada being half as likely as the United States to believe the father of the family must be master in his house. And in fact, in Canada it was diminishing. It was down to about 18% in 1990. In the US, it was up to 50%, like 19 versus 50. And with them getting further apart, the people in the United States in the year 2000 were voting in an election, and it was a high correlation between voting for George Bush and the belief in patriarchy, and those who didn't believe in patriarchy and disagreed that the father was the master in the house voted for Al Gore. Al Gore won the election. No, he lost the election. He won it, but he lost it. And so you had a divided America. And in the meanwhile, in Canada, we're down at 18%. People were asking what's wrong with men in Canada, and why are they not honored the way they should be? And of course, then 2 or 3 years later, George Bush asked Canada to join the coalition of the willing. And he probably was lucky that we didn't join, because if you don't have a manly society that's going to stand up and do what men do, why would you really want them as part of your fighting force over there anyway? So Bush was probably somewhat relieved when Chrétien said, thanks, but no thanks. So that was what we were finding in the year 2003. In many, now there were about a third of the ways we were staying the same as Americans in terms of social values, and about a third we were diverging, and in other areas we were becoming more similar. But there were some very significant areas in which there was this divergence. So then we jump ahead to 2016, and I did write a book in between Fire and Ice and Could It Happen Here? I wrote a book called American Backlash. And that was a book just focused on the evolution in the United States, because I thought that this comparing Canada and the United States would be something that would not appeal much to the American audience. There'd be some who would find it interesting. I thought, why don't I just write a book about the United States and publish it in Canada? Canadians might be interested in just looking at the U.S. And I went down to New York, and I was told that, and this was, book American Backlash, so about 2008. So I had the 2004 survey in, and I was told that there would be no interest in the United States in a Canadian view of their country unless it were complementary. And if you want to come to this, now, I guess I should have read my history and understood that Alexis de Tocqueville, the Frenchman, had been over there in the 1830s, wrote Democracy in America. It was somewhat complimentary of the United States, very many, very interesting insights that Tocqueville had and so on. So they said, look, okay, you want to come down here, publish in the New Yorker, publish in the Atlantic. You've got to live in this country, so you cannot say they, it must be we. This is something I think that Michael Ignatieff learned when he was at Harvard, not to say they, but we. It makes people feel more comfortable about who they're hearing from. Anyway, I did not want to move down there, although things have changed. Now Stephen Marsh has been able to write a book about the coming Civil War, and he's a Canadian, and he lives here, and he's a wonderful writer, and he does publish in the Atlantic and New Yorker and so on. So things may have changed since 2008. So I wrote, so could it happen here? I've updated the our research. I looked at the differences between the two of us. I looked at the way the Americans were going, the way we were going, and in a nutshell, I concluded that yes, there are signs of Trumpism and MAGA in this country, but the antibodies in the Canadian socio-political system are so strong that they would be able to resist those sorts of things. And so I don't know whether I was being complacent, but I was looking at the data and I felt that the ties that kept us together were strong enough that we would be able to resist Trumpism in this country. Now it's 10 years later. You've heard, he got reelected again. Was it last year? No, 2024. And I then thought, well, okay, it's 10 years later. Let's have a look at how Canadians are changing, because now he's been around for a while. We are totally inundated with news of the United States every day. I think I read the Globe and Mail. I think half the news is news about what's going on in the United States. You could almost, there was a book written by Seeley, I think, a sociologist, The Americanization of the Canadian Consciousness. This would have been written in the 60s. And I often think that that is true more and more. Every day we're assaulted with this news. Now there's news about around the world, of course. We get all of that. But we are being assaulted, I think, by news. And I think for maybe a lot of people, it's getting confusing to know whether or not the news you're hearing, did it happen in the States or is it happening in Canada? And for a lot of people who are not all that attentive to things, they may be thinking that what is happening there is happening here. So what are the value shifts then that we've seen in the last 5 years that would tell us whether or not it may be happening here? So the first shift in Canadian values that we see in the last 5 years is a shift to what we call survival values. You know, the Darwinistic survival of the fittest, the strongest will prevail. It's a value that looks at a sense that our society is increasingly determined by power and by dominance. And it has grown significantly in the Canadian mentality over the last 5 years. Patriarchy and sexism have increased in Canada in the last 5 years, with more of us thinking that the father of the family must be master in the house. More of us thinking men are innately superior to women. Another value that we've started tracking over the last 10 years is authoritarian impulse. And it is growing in Canada as well. And this is an impulse that says we need tough leadership. These are difficult times. We need more law and order. And that's something that's growing in Canada. Now, these are trends that are growing. They could go from 10% up to 20% of us, or 20, or 15% to 25%. They're not majority values, but they are growing in Canada. Second trend, and this was a change from what I found in Sex and the Snow. And this is a change toward more ostentation in Canada. A reverence for wealth and success. If you've got it, flaunt it. It's an orientation to consumption. We used to be the experiential hedonists. We were the ones who bragged about trips we'd taken to France or Italy. It was the Americans who bragged about the car they were driving or the big house that they owned in Dallas. But we too now are developing an orientation of ostentatious consumption of material, more materialistic. It's interesting, some of us, we look at Trump in his Oval Office, the Louis XIV's gilded mantelpiece, and we kind of laugh at it. But he is channeling something in American culture, and it's something that's also appearing here. Men are particularly attracted to this, if you've got it, flaunt it. Now, I would interpret this, of course, as, again, if you've got rising patriarchy, rising sexism, these men have grown up in a world in which, especially in Canada, but also in the United States, where the role and status of women has changed dramatically and are much more egalitarian. And so for some, they're welcoming the equality of women in the family, in the workplace, in the political marketplace, and so on. But others, of course, are finding this a bit of a threat. It's a bit of a zero-sum threat. Just as the release of the slaves after the Civil War was a threat to people whose jobs were taken by former slaves. And they were quite resentful of that, and people who find themselves in a zero-sum situation with women are kind of feeling a bit threatened. So what steps do these people take? Well, they, as an example, they drive their BMWs on the highway. They've had their mufflers adjusted so that the sound is even louder, and they're saying, "I'm strong, I'm successful." And their car, "Don't get me onto motorcycles," is kind of an auditory codpiece of who I am and my sense of self-worth. Traditional values is the third values cluster that are also showing some sort of a rebound. And again, the boomers, my generation, were the ones who were the first to, well, they weren't the first, but they did it in large numbers, question the traditional authority of the priests, parents, bosses at work, the presenter on the nightly news, and so on. But now we're seeing a backlash against the progressivism, and we're starting to see a more higher reverence for the traditional family, mom, dad, and the kids, and a decline. The decline we saw in religiosity is on hold. The growth in the value of sexual permissiveness is on hold. The growth of the idea of flexible families, you know, Adam and Steve as well as Adam and Eve, that is also on hold. And other concepts continue to be in decline. The sense of doing your duty, guilt, noblesse oblige, work ethic, propriety, these are still losing their hold on us. So we're seeing a shift to survival values, a shift to ostentatious consumption and status displays, and a shift toward traditional norms. So it's interesting then, you would say, if Canadians are doing that, then isn't it interesting that they've used some of those values in their response to Trump and his threats of tariffs and his threats to annex Canada. So in a sense, our elbows up and our new nationalism is a way of our expressing some of these new values, but they are in opposition to Trump's much more ostentatious display of these values. And I do find this an intriguing way of kind of explaining that a year and a half ago, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives were supposed to be our government. And a guy named Carney came along and actually channeled some of these values that we ought to be standing up, elbows up. We're going to play hockey the way Gordie Howe used to play, and we're going to oppose this guy with his tariffs, and we're going to oppose his sense that we should become the 51st state. This, how am I doing? 5, 10, okay. This sense then that of the tariffs, which many Canadians think are going to affect them, they're going to affect their family, they could lose their jobs, being absorbed in the United States, you might think on the surface of it that this would be something that, I mean, the country is more interesting, it's more dynamic, it's more entertaining than we are. Wouldn't we welcome the opportunity to become part of the United States? Imagine our dollar merges, and when we go to Vegas, we would be winning and gambling with American dollars and not with our our peso, our Canadian peso. But the answer of Canadians is no, absolutely no. We do not want to become part of the United States. We're actually more hostile to the idea of integration with the United States than we were right after the free trade election of 1988. Now, you'll remember that election when Brian Mulroney, who actually had been opposed to free trade when he became Conservative leader, decided that we should have free trade with the United States. Canadians were quite divided. Bill's friend John Turner opposed this. It was the fight of his life. He said, if we have free trade, we will soon be a colony of the United States. And then we went from there. Liberals opposed free trade, but then Chrétien got in and invited Mexico to become part of free trade, so he actually did the opposite of what he was a fine politician. Doing the opposite of what you promise to do when you run for election often turns out to be a very popular thing to do. But anyway, he did that, and I think what we would say is that the free trade made us richer. The other thing it did to us was make us more self-confident, because as we became richer and more self-confident, it gave us the sense of autonomy, and that in fact we can trade with these people. We then tax ourselves the way we want to tax ourselves, and we can continue to build the social welfare state the way we want. And if the Americans want to dismantle their social welfare state, God bless them. We're going to use our wealth to build more of the Canada that we started to build in the progressive era of the 1960s. So it was kind of an irony that the free trade in one way did make us more integrated and dependent upon them. In another way, it made us feel much more self-confident. What would we do if they did invade? We asked this. This is hard to believe. A quarter of us said they'd be willing to join a civil defense force. 13% would volunteer for military service. That would give us, I don't know, 10%, like 4 million. That'd be a lot. We haven't had 4 million people in in the entire in all the world wars and so on. That's armed resistance, say 15%. We'd have to find a gun somewhere, and I'm sure we could go to Rexdale. They'd probably sell us guns. I don't know. And I'm from Rexdale. Sorry. 16% said they'd be willing to die for Canada, which is really kind of a remarkable thing. And another 22% said it sort of depends. You know, for a country that has a tradition of peacekeeping, this is pretty stiff resistance, and showing that, again, some of these values, these traditional manly values of being able to fight for what you believe in, have not disappeared in this country. I'm going to end with my belief that we have in spite of all of our differences, in spite of the federal system, in spite of all the traditional religious and racial and ethnic and other differences among ourselves, we find ourselves actually quite united when it comes to resisting Trump's tariffs and the annexation. And I think one of the studies done recently that would indicate that we have a lot more social capital and social cohesion in this country than the surface might suggest is a study that Pew did. I think it was about 4 to 6 weeks ago. It was about 25 or 30 countries, US, Canada, European countries, Africa, and the Far East. And it asked people in each of these countries, what do you think about the moral values of your fellow Americans, your fellow Canadians, your fellow Frenchmen, and so on? Which country do you think came out with the highest proportion of people who said that the moral values of their fellow countrymen were positive, that they were, by and large, good people? Canada was at the top of the list. And in spite of the fact that we think we've got too much immigration, once immigrants come to our country, we think they're the greatest people in the world. 9 out of 10 are people contributing to the economy. They can be just as good Canadian citizens as anybody else. So that sense of respect for the other is deeply embedded and has become embedded into the Canadian psyche about what it is to be a Canadian. Which country in the world had the lowest proportion of people who thought that the moral values of their fellow citizens were good? It's next door. And this is an astounding, if you want to add up, like, you know, we sociologists, what are the indicators we like? Mortality rate, you know, morbidity and mortality rates. Like, how long does a population live? And, you know, and I also know that we're 3 or 4 men and women live 3 or 4 years longer in this country than we do in the United States. So there are some indicators that you have as to the health of a society, but I found that one was really a strong indicator of the health of the Canadian society. Final number I'll throw at you is what happens there happens here. It's the degree and the ferocity that is the difference, and it makes all the difference. Chicago in the year 2025 had 400 murders, 400 homicides. Toronto, a city of the same size, had 40. 400 versus 40. Is a quantitative difference a qualitative difference? I think it is. Thank you very much.
This
Is on now? Yes, it is. Thank you so much. We are going to turn the floor over for some questions, and we also will have some online. I'd like to get started with one question to lob at you, because in all of these fascinating statistics, I'm curious what's happening with young people today, and what sort of shifts might be taking place amongst this segment of the population, and what that means for any societal trends moving forward if there are some changes.
Well, Melanie, that's another book. But so young people are supposed to, especially in times of affluence, as happened in the 60s, move up the Maslowian hierarchy and feel pretty confident about things, and start to question their parents' values. So this is what we boomers did. We questioned patriarchal authority, the authority of the priest, and so on in the 60s and 70s. And in many other ways, we started to do what Ron Hingelhardt taught, post-materialist values. We started to be interested in the environment and kind of got into fulfillment type of values. Well, young people are now growing up at a time in which, for them at least, the economy is not that great. It's a real struggle to get that first job. And then they have all the threats of, well, then they had COVID thrown at them. That disrupted a lot of them, their educations. They're very well educated, but where are the jobs going to be for these people? The internet was supposed to be, at least in the 90s, we advertised it as a wonderful medium for connection with kindred spirits. Now, internet, in particular social media, is causing stress and anxiety. They're feeling, and I guess I'd have to say that some of those young men are, again, feeling the competition from the young women who are taking their places in the universities where they are the majority. I think, are they not the majority now in medical school? Law school even, Bill, I'm not sure that could even be happening, maybe even more so than medical school. The men then are kind of relegated to the kind of work that is not as rewarding. It's much more likely to be to go from job to job and so on. And then they find themselves, mom and dad were able to buy a house when they were in their 30s, and now the only people who can do that seem to be the ones who chose their parents wisely and are able to have the bank of mom and dad provide that down payment, but which is leading them then to delay forming a family, having a kid. So you bundle all that together, and they're not the only people, but they are the people looking at these survival values. And they're looking at a bit of the consumption values that's kind of making up for the success that the conventional success that their parents were able to enjoy. And again, a bit of this patriarchy, sexism, and so on. And they are, so I would say there's a fellow named Kershaw, is it Paul Kershaw at UBC, studying, what do they call it, Generation Squeeze? And he's doing some very good work. He's been surveying on this. He finds similar kinds of things that I'm just talking about. And his public policy proposal is that we maybe think of this would be something for the feds, I guess, to do, for Carney's government, to shift some of the entitlements going to the elderly to programs for young people. That we're now maybe looking at the kind of change in the culture that might have been equivalent to the people brought up during the Great Depression of the 30s, and that impact of living in the Great Depression affected those people for the rest of their lives. Even though things got very good for them after the war, those values were there, and they were crystallized into their psyches, and they carried those values. We may have a generation then of young people like the pig and the python who will carry these values through, unless we can maybe show the love to them and the sympathy and the empathy and the real programs that we've done for the baby boomers. I think that's the end of that answer for the moment, unless there's a follow-up.
Many more questions, I think, come from that, but I do want to turn it over to the floor. And I see first hand up, so please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Hello, Michael. It's John Campbell. Nice to see you.
Hi.
We have a contrast between Canada and the United States. We've got a world that's international. Are the values that are elsewhere in the world affecting our society in negative and positive ways other than the American ones?
There are instances, given that we have, about 20% foreign born, another 20% are their kids, 40%. Toronto is 80% first or second generation. If you're trying to explain a lot of things going on, look at just that mass of people coming. They are coming to us with religious and patriarchal values, and that would be part of the explanation of bringing those values here. When I've studied generations, once we get the kids into our public education system, which is one of the sadly unheralded public institutions of our country, we're one of the few countries that doesn't have a national minister of education. But at any rate, we have a very good education across the country. Once we get people into our system of education, once they are in multicultural neighborhoods, once they're learning Canadian values, they then tend to adopt Canadian values. The first generation is definitely transitional. The second generation almost looks indistinguishable from the others. The other thing that could be a factor is people coming from conflict zones around the world and bringing those attitudes or values to Canada, and those we would say we see as incidents, like the Air India tragedy many years ago and so on, where foreign conflicts come here and are expressed here. Those would be maybe a couple of examples of where the world comes to Canada. I would say 90% of what the world brings to Canada is positive, but it's not all going to be positive, and there will be some negatives with our being the immigrant society that we are. Yeah.
As someone who studies values, I'm just wondering, given that you study values, I'm wondering if you've looked at the difference in how Canadians regard climate change or the environment, because there have been, someone brought to my attention a graph or polls indicating that the U.S. is much more concerned with these issues of climate change than Canada is, and Canada ranks on the world stage as a country somewhere near the bottom, I think, alongside Russia. Do you have any comment to make on that?
I don't see that. I see Canadians being quite concerned about the environment, but a change we would have seen over the last 5 years in this survival new survival mentality is, well, we're going to have to, there are going to be some negatives, and we're going to put the needs of employment first, or the need for economic development, or the need for us to be strong economically, to stand up to the Americans, or to build defense forces, which also might have to be standing up. So there has been some erosion in the sense that that there will be some cost to the environment for the economic development that we're going to need in order to remain Canada. And I think Carney has tapped into that. You could call it a pragmatism, but, and for a guy who wrote a book on values and a guy who spent a lot of time trying to get businesses to sign on to environmental sustainability agendas, but he is tapping into a mood that is saying we need to be less idealistic on this and more pragmatic on it. I think the Canadians still would want to see us trying to promote battery-powered vehicles and so on. They would want everything, of course, they're Canadians. And as to the United States, the problem there is context is really important, because with Trump and his drill baby drill and support for coal in West Virginia and all of this sort of thing, it does cause a reaction to that on the part of many people who are, and that will be expressed by more progressive blue states who will be encouraging the move to the post-fossil fuel economy. So context in each country is going to be a factor, but yes, there has been an erosion in the sense of in the sense that we can stop, that we could shut down fossil fuels or and still be fine. The sense is that no, we have to continue to do that, but we have to be pragmatic in our doing that. Yeah.
I guess Carney is certainly caught between a rock and a hard place in terms of having written a book and what he sees as what's necessary in a pragmatic way. But I think there are a lot of young people in particular who are quite disillusioned by the backsliding, or people who are quite engaged in the environmental movement generally.
Yeah.
So
There'll be I can imagine that that given his pragmatism and given what Trump and America are doing, idealistic young people are going to be wanting to be involved with NGOs. They may be even more motivated to go to an NGO, to environmental defense or whatever, than they would even electoral politics, if they want to express their values and they want to save our civilization from suicide.
Right, thank you.
And I just want to jump in as well with another question, just to build on, I think, something that when you're talking about this rise of traditionalism, rise of sexism, this sort of displays of power, and hearing those key markers, it makes me ask the question around diversity and inclusion and those values that we as Canadians have really, I think, held on to in terms of inclusivity and being a country of immigrants. And how is that changing, and how does that impact from a societal level our view towards immigration? And is that something to be concerned about, which to me feels like it might be?
Okay, immigration, diversity, equity and inclusion, truth and reconciliation. See if I can bundle those together. I've probably been a bit of a downer in what I've been saying for a lot of you people, because you're my generation. So you were part of that move to questioning traditional authority, to more to idealistic individualism and so on, which was something we all thought we were part of, and gender equality being right up there near the top, environmentalism and so on. Let's start with immigration. And these are Environics polls, but everybody else is polling the same thing, finding an increasing number of Canadians who think that we ought to get a hold of, we ought to cut back on immigration. And that applies to foreign students coming here, and the news that, they were going to, they were supposed, not so much the ones going to university, the ones going to college. And they weren't even going to college, they were going to some agency that had a deal with the college, and they really were coming not to get education, but to get a job. So what happened, and this, peace, order, and good government, we were not providing good government when it came to the immigration file, and we were mishandling it. Our polling showed that from about the middle of the 1990s, right up to about 2014 or 15, Canadians were wanted more immigration. They wanted family reunification. They wanted the point system, people coming in. Temporary foreign workers were fine. Students coming in, fine, and so on. But the mismanagement of the system, where it was just too many, at a time when we were finding it difficult to get housing for our young people, led a lot of Canadians to think we're letting in too many people. But then we look at what do people think about immigrants. And there the change has been almost none. Once people are here and are in the economy, are in our schools, are in our neighborhoods, we think they're just as good as anybody who was born here. We think they're contributing to the economy. They don't come here to get on welfare. Our attitudes, compared to the attitudes that Trump is channeling, where immigrants are, what are the words? I probably wrote them down here somewhere, but they're criminals. He's got ICE. In Canada, ICE is for a place where the Leafs lose a hockey game. But down there, it's how do we get these illegal aliens out of our country? So attitudes to immigrants and to ethnic diversity, to multiculturalism is all very strong. It remains very strong. Our dedication to diversity, equity, and inclusion has not diminished in this country. Whereas in the United States, again, the government has kind of declared war on this woke sensibility. And in our research, it's showing Canadians are continuing to want to advance minorities who've been traditionally marginalized. And right near, if not at the top of the list, are the Indigenous people. And we see no erosion at all in the sense that it's, yes, time for truth, it's time for reconciliation, it's time for the reserves to be much more economically viable. And so we, in spite of this survivalist mentality, the sense that we must maintain, and in a sense, I think it is, a sense that we must now get tougher and in protecting a Canada that is a progressive Canada and that needs to pay attention to our youth who are falling behind, but it's also one in which we keep on these agendas that we have built and even build upon them when it comes to Medicare, support for Dentacare, for pharmacare. It's there. When can we afford it? Probably not tomorrow, but it should be on our agenda. So I think we actually want to protect Canada, not only from Trump, but for Trumpism and the sense actually that they've had since Ronald Reagan was elected, that the government can be the friend of the people. The government is part of the solution. It's not the problem. And Ronald Reagan was elected on government is the problem. And that backlash against the progressive agenda describes a lot of the last 50 years of what's going on in the United States.
Well, those are definitely some words of positivity to end on, certainly.
There's a gentleman over there.
Sure. Okay, we have one last question, and I see someone in the back as well. Oh gosh, I see two,
This
and I do
man
want to get to
has
some
had his
young
hand up.
people. I know I do want to get to some of our younger audience members, and so you in the red sweater, please do stand up, and you're welcome to contribute.
Hi, I'm Eloise. So I wanted to ask you, we're talking about Canadian values, but the values in the English-speaking Canada and in the French-speaking Canada are completely different. And I personally think it's because of those slightly divergence that there's sometimes tension between communities. So do you think because of the resurgence of separatist movement, but not only Quebec, also in Alberta, it's creating a rift in our Canadian values, and how is it impacting our country? Thank you.
I love that question. But my colleague Andrew Parkin is jealous that he's not answering it, and then I'm answering it. So I won't do as good a job as Andrew. Bill 21. And the conflicting views of liberalism, the two views of liberalism, which I find fascinating. And of course, it's before the Supreme Court, 4 days of hearings, everybody's getting a say, use of the notwithstanding clause. Imagine a country that talks about a notwithstanding clause only in Canada. It shouldn't be from sea to sea to sea, it should be the notwithstanding clause, or notwithstanding would be our national motto, I guess. So there, and you all know, you've been reading about it, it's fascinating, and Quebecers who are supposed to be insecure, really not about clothing, it's their language that they're supposed to be insecure about, and here we are debating women's clothing, like are they wearing too many clothes or too few clothes? It's amazing what men are anxious about around this planet. We are a weird species. And then there are countries in which a woman has too many clothes on the beach and she gets arrested. And then there are countries where she has too few clothes, and actually I don't think they'd arrest her. I think they would buy her a drink. But anyway, this debate then as to what is the appropriate attire, and we're talking really about women and hijabs and so on, for people in positions of authority, right? We're talking about teachers and judges and policemen and so on. And Quebec has made the judgment, the laïcité judgment, that women have to be protected from religious patriarchy, because the only reason a woman would wear clothing like that would be because some man, some priest or so on, tells her to do it. We've surveyed these women, and they'll kick you in the shins and say, I'm not doing this because some guy told me. My husband didn't. Actually, my husband would like me to take it off because I'm drawing attention to myself. So that will have to be understood. And then, of course, we unctuous English, non-Quebecers, say we don't care what's on a woman's head, we care what's in her head, believing we are a morally superior species who can tolerate all sorts of differences and so on. And we will have to see how smart those Supreme Court justices are. And, Walt Whitman once said he contradicts himself, he contains multitudes. We're going to need a Supreme Court that can contain the multitudes of the two versions of liberalism, which is kind of a continuation of, what Bill Macdonald likes to talk about, which is mutual accommodation. And beyond that, it's the sense of understanding the other, empathizing with the other, and so on. And actually, I think Bill probably, we will talk about it over Chardonnay, will find this debate to be an intriguing continuation of the conversation that he believes, I think, will lead to some sort of mutual accommodation. But I love that question, and Andrew, forgive me for, he always thinks I did a good job. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you so much. And I know there are more questions in the audience, but we are going to wrap up. We are moving to have a reception next door, so I'm sure that Michael would be very pleased to field any of your additional questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of your questions. Thank you, Michael, so much. Really, really illuminating and disturbing, but ultimately gives me hope and some facts to take away. And so thank you very
Melanie.
much for sharing this.
You can email me. You can email me or the Environics Institute. I will get back to you, I promise. And for anybody who wants to share a glass of wine, are we?
Chardonnay, I hear.
Chardonnay.
So next
Okay,
door,
well,
let's
Bill
hope.
and I
Let's hope,
and,
because that's what I'm
and
looking
Chardonnay.
forward to.
Thank you all for coming today, and I really appreciate having my friends and family and colleagues here to hear me pontificate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll look forward to welcoming you next door. And our thank you as well to the Macdonald family, to all of the supporters of this lecture series. Look forward to the next lecture. But for now, just enjoy the time that we have with Michael Adams. Thank you so much, Michael, again. Thanks, everyone.